In this neighborhood of Jerusalem, there are many bazaars and open markets, and I'm meeting with my good friend Joel Rosenberg, best-selling author and speaker, for a cup of really good espresso. Joel and I are going to meet in an area called The Shook. It's one of the newer open markets, still honoring the layout and structure of the past, but it's more along the lines of, well, Home Depot meets Whole Foods. 1, 2, 3. Great. I'm going to bring my wife back and get some.
Yeah, I know. It's ready.
What do you say?
I think you're basically saying, yeah, sure, whatever.
Oh, thank you so much. Tada.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
We are from Switzerland.
This is Joel Rosenberg, best-selling author.
Right?
Baklava.
Everyone here looks like they're from Central Casting.
Okay, I love baklava.
Yeah.
Do you like baklava?
Unfortunately, too much.
Hi. I'd like to get one of these, please. And what do you want?
One of these.
One of these. We should get an espresso to go with it.
We should.
Thank you very much.
You can't eat that by itself.
Toda. Toda's thank you, isn't it?
Yeah. Toda rabah is thank you very much. Toda lecha.
Right.
Thank you.
So, Joel, we got our baklavas here. We need some coffee to go with this.
Amen.
What do you like to drink? What kind of coffee?
Cafe hafuk.
What is that?
It means upside down coffee. It's basically cappuccino, but for some reason, the way they make it, they turn it around, so cafe hafuk.
Okay, so this is the Shook, right? So
This is true, yes, absolutely. The open air market here in the heart of Jerusalem.
What's it like to live in Israel now? You guys, you were born where?
I was born in the United States, in upstate New York, Syracuse, and I grew up in the States. My father was Orthodox Jewish, came to faith in Jesus as Messiah in 1973, thought he was the first Jew since the Apostle Paul who believed this.
Because there were so few?
Well, he never heard of a Jewish person who believed that, never met one, and in 1973 there weren't that many. But the Spirit of God was moving, not just among Jewish people, but the whole Jesus movement. You got saved in that time. My parents, later, a couple years later, 75, as I studied the scriptures and thought, wait a minute, there's not that many Jewish people who believe in Jesus. This is not just a great joy of God's grace that He's given me, but it's also a responsibility. How do I reach my people?
When Israel became a nation on May 14th, 1948, there were how many Messianic believers?
Maybe 2 dozen.
23
that I know of, but maybe,
and today
there's 12 more.
Today, maybe approximately how many?
15,000.
See, that doesn't sound like a big number, but comparatively, and considering it's Israel, it is a big number.
Right, and if you look, you go from 23 people 68 years ago, 23 to 15,000.
Is it harder for someone who is Jewish to believe in Jesus as Messiah than it is for someone, a Gentile, a non-Jew? Is it a harder process?
Well, it's a miracle in any case, but God does say in the scriptures that we have a partial hardening of us, that we have a blindness, because God brought sent Yeshua, the Messiah, to us first.
Right.
He came to his own, John chapter 1.
His own received him
not.
Yeah.
We didn't get it. Most of us didn't. I mean, obviously a few did. But then to him who gets it, right? Who did receive him, to them he gave the right to become children of God.
Right.
So the gospel went from Israel to the Gentile world.
Right.
Many Jews did come to faith in that time, but not the majority, not even close to the majority.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, hey, now we're talking.
Good.
Thank you. Toda rabah.
Cheers.
Cheers. Welcome to Jerusalem. It's fun to have this conversation here.
Now thank you. And you've called Jerusalem the epicenter.
I have.
Why the epicenter of what and why that word?
Well, epicenter is a geological term, obviously. It's the point above the beginning of an earthquake, right? So I'm using that term because this is the center of God's plan and purpose for the nations.
Right.
Ezekiel chapter 5, verse 5, God says, I set Jerusalem at the center of the nations.
That's true.
Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 7, I put Israel, or verse 14, I put Israel at the navel of the earth. I mean, literally the belly button of the earth.
Yeah.
So, and then Acts chapter 1, verse 8. The gospel will go from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the very ends of the earth.
It's true.
So you and I are from the ends of the earth, right? You're really from the end of the earth. You're from California. I'm from New York. But this is the beginning. The gospel went from here, and now it needs to come back here.
Yes.
And this is, when you look at the little prophecies, there are more prophecies about the future of Israel and the Jewish people than of any other nation in the scriptures.
And you think about the critical role that Jerusalem plays. I mean, of all the cities in the world, Paris and Moscow and, Washington, D.C. And yet the Bible speaks of this tiny little sliver of land called Israel. And in the tiny little sliver of land, this little city called Jerusalem. And here we are in the very middle of the epicenter, the tip of the spear, if you like. And it's all happening right here. And, Israel has a past, a present, and a future. Past all the biblical stories. Think of, what are some of the things that happened in Jerusalem in the Bible? Okay, so this was the capital of Israel under King David.
Right.
And then, of course, moving forward into New Testament times, we have the life and ministry of Jesus.
Absolutely.
That happened
the death and resurrection happened right here. The prophets were stoned here. Jesus wept over the city.
The Shekinah glory of God was in the temple in this city.
That's right. And then departed.
Yes.
Right? And so this has been a city that God has chosen for himself. Yeah. That's what he says. I chose Jerusalem. That's a sovereign act. He could have chose Tokyo. He could have chose, Costa Mesa. He could have chose wherever. But he chose Jerusalem. God says to be the city of the great king.
That's right. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. It's like God said, I'll never forget you. So God remembers the city. That's the city of the past. But now the city of the present. Bustling city. We have kind of the old city that people will often go to. The Arab quarters there. Right. And then that around that area is the Western Wall, which the lower part of the original stones from Herod's era or before.
Yeah, Herod's era.
Yeah. And then up above you see the Crusader and the various groups that have built on this wall. Jewish people, not only Jewish people, but primarily. They're at the wall taking little slips of paper with prayers. Why is that a holy site to them?
It's what we see as the Western Wall is a portion of the retaining wall that was built. The temple was above it. There are no stones left from the temple. Yeah. Jesus himself said there would be no stones left. There would be all
one
overthrown.
Stone left upon another.
Because out of judgment. So Jesus said that the temple would be destroyed. But why did he say it? Well, he said it because Daniel told us in Daniel chapter 9 that the Messiah will come. Then he will be cut off. The rabbis didn't know what it meant to be cut off. And then the city of Jerusalem and the sanctuary, the temple, will be destroyed. Yeah. That's the order. So Jesus is the Messiah. He knew he was about to be cut off, meaning crucified and killed and buried, according to the scriptures. But then he knew that in judgment, that the temple and the city of Jerusalem would be destroyed. And it was. So there are no stones left from the temple, but the temple era, this retaining wall that Herod built. Why? Because originally Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount, was a regular little mountain. David wanted a temple built. Solomon built it, and it was on the top of that.
That's right.
That was then destroyed. The Jews were dispersed. But when they came back and God allowed for the second temple to be built, Herod wanted more Jews to be able to worship there. As a political move, he wanted Jews to be respectful of him, to love him, or at least to not hate him. So he told his engineers, figure out how to make a larger place for Jews to gather. Well, what are you going to do? And he goes, and if you don't do it, I'm going to cut your heads off. Yeah. So they thought, okay, how about we cut the head of the mountain off? We'll flatten the mountain, then we'll build a retaining wall around it. We'll build a platform, and then we'll build the temple over it. Yeah. Wonderful. Then hundreds of thousands of Jews can meet there. That's what we have. And what the Western Wall is a portion of that retaining wall that allows for that base.
So it's the past, the present. What is the future of Jerusalem in the Bible? What's going to happen here in the future?
Well, there's several things. First of all, we know that a third temple will be built.
That's right.
We know the temple will be built. There will be sacrifices.
I'm going to eat baklava.
Please, my friend.
Are you going to eat yours?
I might. We'll see. So a temple will be built, and then we know that an Antichrist. The Antichrist, but an anti-Messiah figure from the European Roman rebuilt empire will come and take over, and he will invade the beautiful land, Daniel tells us, and he will desecrate the temple. Right. Jesus tells us.
He'll seem like a good guy at first.
He will seem like a peacemaker. He will seem like a diplomat. Like finally, somebody has come to make it right.
And rebuilding the temple for the Jews.
The temple will probably have already been built. It's possible that he's involved in that, but it's possible that it's already rebuilt. Prophet scholars differ on that.
We know he desecrates it.
We know he will desecrate it. He will, in fact, probably set up his throne inside the temple because he proclaims himself to be God. Yeah. We know that Daniel tells us this, and Paul tells us this to the Thessalonians. So, when Christ, the real true Christ, the second coming happens, and Christ will physically touch down on the Mount of Olives, overlooking the Temple Mount. He will split that mountain in two.
That's right.
And then he will defeat all the forces of the Antichrist, including the Antichrist himself.
Yes.
And he is not going to inhabit that desecrated third temple.
Yeah.
He will destroy it, he will raze it to the ground, and then build what we call Ezekiel's temple.
Yeah.
What's described as the last few chapters of the book of Ezekiel. A magnificent, monumental structure, never been built before. That's the one that Christ will reign from for 1,000 years.
You know, that's right. You know, it's interesting. Jesus in Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse, the Mount of Olives, facing the old city of Jerusalem. You know, you have that statement. He says, and when you see the abomination of desolation, let the reader understand. That to me is a clue as to why Bible prophecy matters. Here we're looking at eschatology, the study of end times events in the Bible. Jesus is saying, let the reader understand. Why would he say that if we shouldn't study Bible prophecy? Because some people, and we've talked about this before, sort of a trend maybe in the church, to not look at these end times events like maybe we did in earlier generations. And so, but there's a great blessing promise to the person, for instance, who reads and studies and keeps the words of the book of Revelation, right? So Bible prophecy is important, isn't it?
It's very important. 27% of all scripture is prophecy. Now, a bunch of that, at least half of it, has already come true.
Yeah.
This is one of the validators that scripture is divine, that it really is from the words of an all-seeing, all-knowing God, all-powerful God, because he can tell us the future.
Yeah.
And he gave us a certain set of prophecies that came true, including the messianic prophecies.
Yeah, that's right.
And then the next set of prophecies are about things that will come true, and that's exciting. The fact that you and I are sitting in a reconstituted state of Israel, in a Jerusalem that's been rebuilt, where Jews have come back from all over the world to regather here.
How many Jews are living here now?
6.5 million, roughly.
Right, go ahead.
This is itself fulfillment of Bible prophecy.
We're in a fulfillment of Bible prophecy.
For 1,900 years, Jews, or almost 2,000 years, Jews prayed next year in Jerusalem, right? And yet it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Even many of our church fathers said, well, you can't take those verses literally. We don't think that God literally means that Israel will be a geopolitical sovereign state again.
Who would have ever thought, if you to think in the 40s when the Holocaust is raging, and maybe we didn't even fully understand the full implications of it until World War II was ended, and we really saw what Hitler was doing in those concentration camps. Who would ever thought that these people, the Jewish people, who have suffered so greatly, would not only return to their land, but build this nation, survive the attacks and the War of Independence, the 67 war, the 73 war, and now here they stand, you know, able to defend themselves. I mean, it is a modern day miracle. There's no logical explanation.
It is, and so I think for many of your viewers who are thinking, well, come on, Bible prophecy, end times prophecy. I mean, isn't that a little out there? Like, you don't really believe that. Listen, the fact that Israel exists, that you hear about it in the news all the time, this is evidence that end times Bible prophecy is true.